I've already given this house to my parents, and I'm also thinking we should get a divorce. I don't see a need for us to have a relationship anymore, James said coldly, pointing towards the door, signaling for me to leave. He kept throwing insults my way, while his parents silently smiled in support of his actions. However, their words didn't bother me. I nodded quietly, accepting the decision to leave. I already had a plan in place, and with the bag I had packed beforehand, I left the house without any hesitation. They still hadn't realized the serious consequences awaiting them. My name is Sally, and I just turned 50. A lot of time has passed since we got married, and our children are grown and live on their own. I used to work a regular office job, but through a friend's help, I now spend my days teaching others how to make handmade accessories, which was once my hobby. This new job has been a turning point for me, and teaching students and sharing the joy of crafting has made each day fulfilling. Some people might think negatively about turning a hobby into a career, but I feel very satisfied. James and I met by chance at the company where I worked. He was with one of our client companies, and we started seeing each other at work gatherings. Slowly, we got to know each other, grew close, and eventually decided to marry. After 3 years of marriage, we welcomed a healthy, lively boy. He was intelligent, graduated from a top university, and now works at a major company. He lives happily with his lovely wife, and as parents, seeing him happy is our greatest joy. But while our son's life blossomed, our own relationship began to fade. Years passed, and around the time our son started his career, James began to change. The kind, thoughtful man I once knew was gone. "Sally, hurry up and make dinner," he barked, treating me more like a housekeeper than a partner, always demanding things in a bossy tone. His demands and tastes seemed to change constantly, which was exhausting. "The tomato soup is too strong," he'd complain. So, I made the soup lighter the next day, but then he yelled that it was too bland. One time, I even kept the miso soup at the same taste for several days in a row, just to see his reaction, but he still complained that it was either too strong or too light. Depending on his mood, I started to realize that he wasn't actually bothered by the taste, just wanted something to complain about, and this childish behavior left me speechless. Recently, James has been getting angry over the smallest things, blaming me and verbally abusing me more often. I've been wanting to escape this life and start fresh. I often wonder what changed James so much, but I can't just leave. There's still a mortgage to pay, which ties me down. To make matters worse, James suddenly quit his job without explaining why and now spends all day lounging around. He barely helps with chores or housework. When I come home tired from work, I find the floor littered with empty snack wrappers and trash. Despite all this, I manage to keep the household going with my salary. In fact, the house we live in was recently rebuilt, entirely funded by my savings. I manage the finances, setting aside money for the house bit by bit. This house means a lot to me, not just because of the mortgage, but because it represents my hard work and dreams. I even chose specific designs and details to make it exactly as I wanted. I especially love the spacious kitchen, which makes cooking easy and enjoyable. In the beginning, James had plenty of ideas for the house's design too, but when I reminded him that I was paying for it, he stopped giving his opinions. Over several months, we faced some challenges and budget issues, so not every feature I wanted could be included. Still, we ended up with a house that fulfilled our dream. I felt a deep happiness about finally having our dream home. However, the construction costs ended up being much higher than we'd expected, and we had to take out a bigger loan than planned. Taking on such a large loan in our 50s was something we hadn't imagined, but the joy of having a new home gave us the motivation to handle it. On the other hand, James seemed a bit upset, because his ideas weren't really included in the design. "This isn't even necessary. It's like throwing money away," he'd complain. I ignored his grumbling, but he started to distance himself from me, and his behavior changed. He began leaving trash around the house and purposely messing things up to annoy me. His childish behavior seemed to come from his frustration, and I couldn't help but wonder how long this situation would last. Each day, I found myself thinking about it more. A few months after we moved in, the doorbell rang unexpectedly one day. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I didn't know who it could be. As I got up to answer, James went to the door first, as if he knew who it was. Soon, I heard cheerful voices and laughter coming from the entrance. When the door to the living room opened, I saw the faces of our visitors' in-laws, Harold and Alice. Honestly, I'd always felt uneasy around them. When we first got engaged, they treated me poorly, looking down on me because they felt I was from a lower social class. Even on our wedding day, they assessed me with a cold attitude. They continued to interface in our lives after we married, and I constantly felt the pressure of not knowing how to deal with them. I thought things had maybe calmed down, since we hadn't seen or heard from James's parents in a while, so their sudden visit caught me off guard. When they arrived, I greeted them politely, feeling a bit tense, but they walked past me without a word, even bumping into my shoulder as if they were ignoring me on purpose. "Isn't this an amazing house? You should check out every room," James told them enthusiastically. "The kitchen, especially, is so spacious and easy to use." They looked around, and when they came back, it was clear they were pleased, but James's expression turned cold, and he suddenly barked at me. "What are you doing? Hurry up and prepare some tea and snacks. My parents are waiting." Caught off guard, I quickly went to get the best tea and snacks I had on hand, though it wasn't anything fancy since I hadn't expected guests. But as I served them, James's father, Harold, frowned and remarked, "Is this the best you can do for us?" I had hoped for better, but I guess it's just as I thought. They finished the tea and snacks, even while complaining. Looking around the house, Harold finally commented, "This really is a nice place. Seems like a good place to live." Then, with a big smile, James told them, "Dad, Mom, you're always welcome here. Why don't you come live with us?" Ignoring me, they listened eagerly to James. Watching them walk out, I felt a huge distance between James and me. Seeing him laugh and talk so warmly with his parents was something I hadn't seen in a long time. After James's invitation, his parents started visiting more and more. At first, it was just a few times a month, then several times a week, and eventually almost every day. Each visit came with criticisms aimed at me, and James did nothing to stop them. In fact, he began to join in, blaming me constantly. "She never listens to what I say," he complained to them. Honestly, it was frustrating. I'd felt this way for a while now. James would say things like, "Sally, how could you make our son go through this?" as if everything was my fault. But I was the one dealing with challenges every day because of them, not the other way around. Still, all I could do was say, "I'm sorry," instead of shouting what I really felt. The visits from James's parents kept increasing, even more than I'd expected. They started coming over when I wasn't home, often showing up with James. It was obvious what was happening while I was away. Every time I returned, empty beer cans and bottles were all over, spilled alcohol stained the new rug, and the smell filled the air. It broke my heart to see our new home being treated like this. When I tried to complain, James would snap, "We're always whining even though you're not helping at all. Your job is to make money and do as I say. Don't you get that?" But it was my hard-earned money that paid for the alcohol, and it didn't sit right with me. James wasn't just drinking. He'd taken up gambling, too, which made me worry constantly. I'd find betting slips on the table or stuffed in the couch cushions. Every time I tried to explain the risks and how gambling was hurting us financially, he brushed it off, knowing that the money he was gambling away was money I worked so hard for. Made it even more painful. For about a month, the in-laws continued to visit, often timing their visits when I was out. I kept wondering how I could escape this situation. Then, one day, I finished work early and came home to find James's parents casually hanging out in our house. "What are you doing here?" I asked, surprised. They just stared at me and clicked their tongues, making it clear I was the one who seemed out of place. But this was my house, and I was tired of feeling like a stranger in my own home. Between James's behavior and the constant interference from his parents, my stress was reaching its limit. I realized I couldn't just react emotionally, needed a plan, so I started thinking carefully about what to do. Then something strange happened. The in-laws showed up at a time when I was supposed to be out. Oh, this is unusual. You usually avoid coming when I'm here. What's different today? I asked with a hint of sarcasm. They looked a bit annoyed and said, "We didn't choose the time based on you. It just happened." Rolling my eyes, I sighed internally, but they ignored me and walked into the living room, where James was waiting to welcome them, leading them into the kitchen with a big smile. I noticed their shoes were tossed carelessly by the entrance, as if they felt completely at home here. In the kitchen, James's mom, Alice, was examining the new gadgets and appliances I had bought. "New things really are better," she said, admiringly. "With a kitchen like this, cooking would be so much more enjoyable." After finishing their inspection of the kitchen, Harold suggested, "Let's check out the bathroom next." The three of them made their way there, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they had some hidden agenda. They were meticulously inspecting every corner of the house, as if confirming something. When they finally left, there were satisfied expressions that made me feel even more uneasy. "What were you inspecting? Is there something you need to tell me?" I asked James. He brushed me off, saying, "I told you not to worry. It's none of your business." His behavior was strange, almost like he was hiding something important. I couldn't grasp exactly what was going on, so I just kept a watchful eye on the situation. Then, one day after work, I came home to see a large moving truck parked outside. The logo read "Moving Center," and I noticed James was speaking with the driver and some representatives. When he saw me, he quickly looked away and disappeared into the house. My heart sank, and things got even worse when my in-laws showed up at the same time. "Oh, Sally, you're home early. Come inside," Harold said with an overly friendly tone. "Right, we can't waste time out here," Alice added, nudging me inside. Their words and the hurried looks they exchanged gave me a sense that they were about to set something into motion. As I stepped inside, I was shocked to find that the house looked completely different. The furniture and decorations I'd chosen and loved were gone, replaced with my in-laws' old, worn pieces. My favorite desk and shelves were nowhere to be found, as if they'd been erased. Instead, there, I barely had a moment to process it before the three of them gathered around me with smug smiles. James spoke up, looking pleased with himself. "Listen carefully. I have something important to tell you," he said. Though my heart was racing, I tried to keep calm. He took a deep breath, then continued with an expression of forced sympathy. "The truth is, I've sold this house to my parents. I don't think we can live together here anymore. I think it's best if we get a divorce." As if to reinforce his words, Harold and Alice nodded in agreement, giving me stern, almost mocking looks. It was clear they'd been planning this for a while. They wanted to push me out and take the house for themselves. I could feel their scheme unfolding around me, leaving me isolated and outmaneuvered. When James suddenly announced he wanted a divorce, I wasn't surprised. I calmly signed the papers, almost as if I'd been expecting it, and took off my wedding ring, placing it quietly on the table. Looking at James and his parents, I let them know I'd be leaving the house. I had prepared for this moment, and seeing the shock on their faces gave me a feeling of satisfaction. It felt like a small victory, knowing I had seen through their plan and acted accordingly. With their stunned expressions behind me, I left, ready to start the next chapter of my life. I'd had suspicions about James and his parents' strange behavior, especially since they started visiting frequently when I wasn't home. I sensed they were planning something, so I decided to install surveillance cameras around the house. At first, I felt uneasy about putting cameras in my own home, but as my mistrust grew, I went ahead and set them up in hidden spots, linked to my phone so I could check the footage anytime. The first day, everything seemed normal. They were just chatting, but their words still stung. I overheard James's mom saying, "It's awful how she's making James suffer so much. She has no gratitude." It hurt, knowing they didn't see that I was the one supporting the family financially. As time went on, I caught a conversation that shocked me. James was discussing selling the house to his parents. At first, I thought it was just a joke, but over the next few days, The discussion continued, with his parents talking excitedly about getting new furniture and even making the house accessible for their needs. Realizing they were serious, I began taking steps to secure my future. I started looking for a new place to live, and I initiated the process to transfer the home loan from my name to James's. If they were so eager to push me out, they could also take on the mortgage and all the responsibilities that came with it. I paid the $1,900 monthly mortgage from my own hard-earned salary. I knew that James and his parents wouldn't be able to afford it, so I decided I wouldn't offer any financial help, no matter how hard it got for them. Feeling free from the stress of dealing with James and his family, I moved into my new home, fully furnished and ready for me to start fresh. After a long day, I collapsed into bed, enjoying the peaceful exhaustion. The next morning, I slept in something I hadn't done since marrying James. When I finally woke up, it was already past noon, and I was relieved to have a day off to rest. Just as I was drifting back to sleep, the doorbell rang. To my surprise, James and his parents were at the door. "Why are you all here?" I asked, shocked that they had found my new place. Ignoring my question, they barged in and thrust a document in front of me. "Why did you change the house loan to James's name without telling us?" they demanded. I kept my calm and replied, "I don't live in that house anymore, and we're no longer family." They seemed genuinely shocked by the transfer. James's parents started to complain, saying they couldn't afford the high monthly payment on their small pensions. James, visibly frustrated, added, "We can't pay that amount." It was clear they hadn't thought this through when they tried to take over the house. They had assumed I would keep paying for it. James crumpled up the documents in anger, throwing them on the floor. "We're not paying this. No way," he shouted. I explained, "If you don't pay, the debt will grow with interest and late fees, making the final amount much higher than it is now." Surprised, James asked if that was really how loans worked. I suggested he look it up online to understand the risks of not paying. Hesitantly, he pulled out his phone and began searching for more information, finally realizing the financial reality he was facing. A few seconds later, James's face turned pale, and he looked shocked and worried. Alice, looking over his shoulder at his phone, was equally surprised. "If this amount is true, what should we do?" she asked. I replied, "That's why it's important to get the right information from the start and plan for the payments properly. This is more serious than you thought." James and his parents became even paler. After a deep sigh, I said, "We can't come up with such a large amount of money right away, but surely you have some savings or assets, right?" James shook his head. "There's no savings or assets. I have a lot of debt from gambling and no stable income. We don't own anything to divide between us." Hearing this, James looked even more pale as the reality hit him. I continued, "I suggest you look for new jobs. You need a fresh start. Talking here won't change anything." James and his parents started pleading with me, trying to fix our relationship, but I didn't want to hear it. I shut the door to escape their voices and called the police. I told the authorities, "There are people shouting outside my house." I didn't feel bad about calling the police. These people, once close to me, now felt like strangers. The police arrived and escorted them away. Later, it was clear they couldn't afford the mortgage, so they moved to a cheaper apartment on the outskirts of town. James, Harold, and Alice went to many job interviews, but only James got a part-time job, which he used to support his family. As for me, my life went on unchanged. I focused on my job and started a blog about handmade crafts. To my surprise, the blog became popular, and my income more than doubled. I even started getting offers to teach workshops and courses about crafts. I had no desire to remarry. I was determined to live on my own and build a new life. One day, while going through old papers, I found a household account book from the early days of my marriage. It reminded me of the difficult financial times we had, when we carefully tracked every expense. Looking through the book, I remembered those tough days, but I knew that was all in the past. With a new sense of purpose, I put the book back on the shelf, ready to continue building my own happiness.